The civil rights movement that will be presented today is episode 1 of the series for Black History Month. This episode specifically focuses the timeline of the fight for civil rights and significant African Americans who have made an impact on whether it was on music, history, or science. Black History Month is crucial for our understanding of what Black liberation is, paying tribute to those who have contributed their lives to the fight and to celebrate the achievements of African Americans. Brown v. Board of Education includes the ruling of segregation in children's schools to be unlawful in the United States. Brown v. Board of Education would not just change the lives of the Black community, but the lives of Black and Indigenous people of color forever, thus creating the path of what the civil rights movement is known as of today. The Supreme Court ruled Plessy v. Ferguson that deemed segregated schools were constitutional, implementing the vendetta of separate but equal, only to display a lack of equality between the two groups. Plessy v. Ferguson consisted of laws known as Jim Crow laws that consisted of the following: separation between the Black and white community of buses, schools, restaurants, any public service, and much more. These laws were rooted as a replacement of the ratification of the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. Instead of physical handcuffs that were imposed on the Black individual, invisible restraints were placed. These laws stripped them of basic human rights, denying them proper health care, ability to hold jobs, receive an education, and anyone who resisted would face death, fines, jail sentences, or be detained. Soon following, on August 28, 1955, was the heinous abduction and brutal beating and murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till, his murder being based off the allegation of teasing of a white woman, Caroline Bryant. Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam, the husband and brother-in-law, kidnapped him, brutally beat him, and murdered him. 2 weeks after Emmett's body was found, Milam and Bryant faced trial. Consisting of an all-white jury, they decided they were not guilty. In 2017, Caroline Bryant admitted that Emmett never laid a hand on her. No matter what he did, nothing would ever justify what was done to him and the pain that was inflicted on his family. This trial acted as a catalyst to shine light on segregation, the civil rights movement, and white supremacy in the South. 100 days on December 1st, 1955, after Emmett's murder, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger. Her initial thought was to go on the back of the bus, but she thought about Emmett and couldn't. Parks was arrested for violating bus segregation laws. This act played a major role to organize a Montgomery bus boycott, led by infamous Martin Luther King Jr. The Montgomery bus boycott consisted of Black individuals refusing to ride buses in Montgomery, Alabama. 40,000 African American riders boycotted. Although people of color being the majority of Montgomery's bus ridership, the city denied any of the protesters' demands, including the hiring of Black drivers, first-seated policy, and courtesy. This boycott led to Black residents choosing to walk to their destinations. They organized carpools, and African American taxi drivers charged only 10 cents, the same as the bus fare. On June 5, 1956, a federal court ruled that laws requiring or promoting segregation were in violation of the 14th Amendment. Unfortunately, violence followed along integration. Buses were being shot, and Black churches and the homes of prominent Black leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. were bombed, even though King was notorious for his advocacy of non-violent resistance. Following events included Little Rock Nine. 9 Black Americans, Melba Patio, Ernest Green, Elizabeth Eckford, Minnie Jean Brown, Terrence Roberts, Carlotta Walls, Jefferson Thomas, Gloria Ray, and Thelma Mothershed, attempted to attend Central High, a dominant white school, encountering a large white crowd threatening them, shouting, and throwing things at them. Arkansas Governor Orville Eugene sent 270 soldiers of the National Guard to block the entrance. His intention was to defy the federal case. This case attracted national attention. After 9 days, the students returned to the school again. After being discovered by white protesters, students were sent home after this. After being separated from their classmates and facing angry, violent mobs, Ernest Green was the first African American student to graduate Central High. Peaceful protesters found another strategy to protest: sit-in movements. Peaceful protests, most notoriously led by Martin Luther King Jr., caught thousands of supporters. His different strategy of protesting caught even the white man's eye. Although to not be mistaken, he strongly believed the riots were the language of the unheard. On February 1st, 1960, 4 African American college students in Greensboro, North Carolina, came to a diner and asked for service. When service was not given due to their skin color, they sat in the diner, regardless of what was said to them by white individuals. Sit-in organizers wanted to abandon the thought of using violence to receive justice. They did receive some of this partially. Over the years, diners would drop their segregated policies. The SNCC, Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and CORE, Congress on Racial Equality, was created, becoming a grassroots organization catalyzed an event known as the Freedom Riders. The Freedom Riders were described as groups of white and black individuals riding on buses to the South in protest of segregated bus terminals. They were faced with angry white mobs, slashing their tires and violently attacking the Freedom Riders. Protesters were arrested and beat. Despite this, it caught national television. The Freedom Riders fought to take a case to the Supreme Court known as Boynton v. Virginia, which was used as a counter-argument of segregation of public transportation terminals. Of one of the many infamous Freedom Riders was John Lewis. Him and Albert Bigelow were brutally assaulted by an angry white mob. On May 14, 1961, the bus reached Anniston, Alabama. There was a mob awaiting the Freedom Riders. When tires were slashed, a bomb was thrown on the bus. The Freedom Riders escaped, but were soon attacked. Although Birmingham's Public Safety Commissioner, Bull Connor, was well aware of the riders arriving, he aided no police protection. The riots were continued over several months. Finally, their commitment paid off. The Kennedy administration implemented regulations of the prohibition of segregation in public transportation terminals. Following in the spring came Birmingham protests. The SCLC and ACM-HR gathered to protest the segregation that was carried out in the system. Albert Batwell, a moderate candidate, defeated Birmingham's Eugene Bull Connor in a runoff mayor election. On April 3rd, King joined to educate the crowd in Birmingham and performed sit-in movements, marches on city halls, and boycotts. On April 10th, the local government obtained an injunction against the protests. King denied the injunction pertaining as unconstitutional and undemocratic. On April 12th, he was arrested. He was placed in solitary confinement and denied his constitutional rights of an attorney. On April 20th, he was released on bond. In order to keep the protests, the SCLC used children to protest. Over 1,000 African American children protested the streets of Birmingham. Hundreds were arrested. Their commissioner demanded police and fire departments use force on children. Images spread of the protests containing children being blasted by high-pressure fire hoses, clubbed by police officers, and attacked viciously by police dogs. This sparked a light, and people were outraged of such acts were committed against just children. On May 10th, an agreement was set put that stated the removal of whites-only and blacks-only signs to be removed. This truce raged segregationists. An explosion was set off at a hotel where King and SCLC members had stayed. King's brother, Alfred Daniel King, was bombed, but survived. John F. Kennedy sent 3,000 troops in response to this attack. Civil rights leader Medgar Evers was shot to death by white supremacist Byron de la Beckwith in 1963. Evers recruited poor African Americans into the civil rights movement. He was crucial in achieving witnesses and evidence for the Emmett Till murder case. When his murderer, Byron de la Beckwith, faced trial with an all-white jury that couldn't reach a verdict, following a second all-white jury that reached no verdict, finally, in 1994, a racially mixed jury in Jackson found Beckwith guilty of murder. On August 28, 1963, 250,000 individuals attended the March on Washington near the Lincoln Memorial. This is where the infamous I Have a Dream speech was delivered by Martin Luther King Jr. This march was to advocate for the racial discrimination that occurred in jobs. The march included Randolph, leader of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, Wilkins, executive secretary of the NAACP, Dr. King, chairman of the SCLC, James Farmer, founder of the Racial Equality, John Lewis, president of the SNCC, and Whitney Young, executive director of the National Urban League. 4 months later, Ku Klux Klan members on September 15, 1963, killed 4 young girls. Addie Collins, age 14, Carol McNair, age 11, Carol Robertson, age 14, and Cynthia Wesley, age 14, in an explosion at a Baptist church. Signing of the Civil Rights Act occurred on June 2, 1964 by Lyndon B. Johnson. 1 year later, he signed the National Voting Rights Act of 1965. The formation of these laws made discrimination against black individuals and women illegal. African Americans held the power to finally represent themselves in government. The assassination of Malcolm X occurred on February 21st, 1965 by Thomas Hagen. Malcolm X held up the voice of the black Muslim individual in the civil rights movement. He pushed the thought of fighting against white aggression by any means that differentiated from Dr. King. They both wanted freedom and justice, but believed it would be pertained in 2 different ways. In 1966, the Black Panther Party was founded. This is a black activist organization who challenged the police and protected the black community from police brutality. They also offered mutual aid to those who were in need. Hugh Newton and Bobby Seale were the founders of this party. They fought to establish socialism and fought for arming black and indigenous people of color. They believed the path MLK took failed and preached for a revolutionary war. They spoke out for all marginalized groups. On October 2, 1967, Thurgood Marshall was sworn in to be the first African American Supreme Court justice. He was known for his advocacy in the civil rights movement, mostly known for speaking for the Brown v. Board of Education case. On April 4, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by James Earl Ray. Riots broke out soon following his murder, also known as the Holy Upcoming Week. This was the greatest social unrest America had received since the Civil War. President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act on April 11, 1968, also known as the Fair Housing Act, providing equal housing opportunity regardless of race, religion, or national origin. The impact of this led to the migration of black populations moving from rural to urban cities, having white individuals taking the jobs that black communities needed, further creating marginalized communities consisting of unemployment and crime. This act was meant to prevent discrimination in reference to housing. Muhammad Ali was a black and Muslim boxer and activist. He's deemed the greatest of all time, and he refused to be drafted into the Vietnam War. Duke Ellington was an African-American composer whose music arose during the Civil Rights Movement. Famous songs included Take the A Train and In a Sentimental Mood. Jackie Robinson, who was a baseball player and civil rights activist, and he's most known for becoming the first African-American who played Major League Baseball and played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Barack Obama, as we all know, the first African-American president elected. He subdued the Great Recession and created a bill of health care known as Obamacare. Serena Williams, her record consists of 23 Grand Slam titles and 4 Olympic gold medals. Asuda Shakur was a member of the Black Liberation Army who advocated of civil rights for minorities. Daisy Bates is known to be the mentor of the Little Rock Nine. She was a journalist, a civil rights activist, and publisher. Shirley Chisholm was a vice chairman of the House of Representatives. She was the first black woman who was elected into Congress. Bayard Rustin, who was the person who really organized and strategized. As a gay man who had controversial ties to communism, he pushed for better wages and more jobs. Claudette Colvin, she was a 15-year-old girl who refused to give up her seat to a white person in Montgomery, Alabama before Rosa Parks. Bessie Coleman was the first African-American licensed pilot. She paved the way for future pilots. Alice Coleman, the first African-American woman from any country to win an Olympic gold medal at the 1948 Summer Olympics in London. She set the record high for a high jump. Marsha P. Johnson was a black trans woman and civil rights activist. She fought for equality through the Gay Liberation Front and part of an organization. As many people might think we have stopped fighting against racial injustice, we have yet to finish the journey to fight racism. We are still fighting against systemic racism. We are witnesses to see this today. The disproportionate rate of the black community being unjustly detained and murdered by our system. We must open our ears and listen to black voices and liberate them rather than to suppress them. Black lives matter.